In the Perspectrum podcast, we discuss controversial topics. Outside of this context, Michael and I are both working professionals. While doing the show, we are not acting as agents or representatives of our respective institutions, and none of the views that we express reflect the outlooks of our employers. So don't come to my office and throw toilet paper at me.
And I don't have an office, but don't come to my cube. Hello and welcome to the Perspectrum. I'm Michael Bloom.
And I'm Nathan Seelove.
We've got another good episode for you tonight. Unfortunately, the news does not get any lighter the longer we go on and keep doing this podcast. But we've got some interesting segments tonight. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about Elon Musk, Doge, and the corruption that seems to be rampant throughout his running of that part of the government. I think an important takeaway from that is this is one example of one dude in one area driving all of this corruption, and it's just a pattern that is rampant throughout the Trump administration. So this is more of an example than it is like a smoking gun.
Yeah.
And then for our second segment, we're going to dive into some of RFK's recent comments about autism and talk about why, not only are they just factually wrong, but why his perspective on autism is totally absurd and dehumanizing and ungrounded to the reality of what autism even is.
Ooh, that one's gonna be fun.
Yeah, that's gonna be fun.
Because I know that I never talk about this, but I'm on the autism spectrum, so I didn't realize that I didn't have to pay taxes.
Yeah, he's an unbiased source, no dog in this fight.
I'm a completely unbiased source.
Dude, you're so lucky. You never get to pay never have to pay taxes. You never get you never have to have a job. You never have to pretend to play baseball.
and I never have to use the bathroom by myself. I always have someone to help me with that.
Totally.
I'm like what's it? What Louis the 12th. I believe it was Louis the 12th that was apparently well known for taking a shit around other nobles, and the biggest honor would go to the noble that would get to wipe his ass. Unlike the Sun King.
Don't say that too loud. That might become a new cabinet level position in the Trump administration.
I wouldn't be surprised if it already was.
Yeah,
honestly.
for sure.
And it's JD Vance's.
No, he doesn't get that honor. Okay,
no,
so
he's too busy with the couches.
Let's dive into it. So ultimately, the thing that ties together all of not only the corruption in the Trump administration, but even specifically Musk's angle, his version of corruption, his self-dealing, his conflicts of interest, is the theme that ties all this together is that this government is willing and very happy to sacrifice us, our safety, our well-being, our money, and our benefits as taxpayers to benefit themselves. And Musk is a great example of exactly that kind of thing. Just another very explicit version of the ultra-rich getting paid off the backs of the rest of us, which, you can find examples all over, notably in, the proposed tax cuts, right? Where, Trump's tax cuts are, largely, almost exclusively going to go to the wealthiest Americans and be paid for by the rest of us, shutting down, reducing Social Security benefits and shutting down government programs.
And one other thing that we also need to acknowledge is the fact that in a lot of ways, this is just the natural conclusion of something we've been heading towards for a long time.
Yeah.
The fact that the wealthiest Americans have always had an excess of power in our politics, that has been par for the course for the last several decades.
Yeah.
What makes this unique is that for once they're cutting out the middleman.
Yes.
And they're just straight up having the wealthy people go in there and just directly
write themselves
run things,
fucking checks.
all just in broad daylight, basically. Like, so one of the things that I think that we need to take from this is that if we ever do get out of this fucking oligarchical, I don't know if that's a word, nightmare, then not only do we need to make sure that this specific thing never happens again, we also need to look at the ways in which oligarchy was present before this.
Yeah.
We need to look at campaign finance reform, and we need to actually be paying attention to websites like Open Secrets that lay out exactly which industries are paying which politicians.
Yeah.
And the politicians that are beholden to industries, clearly, we need to never fucking trust them again, Democrat or Republican.
Yeah. And that's the thing. The original corruption here, we shouldn't forget, from Musk, aside from, bolstering right-wing people on Twitter and stuff like that, was $300 million invested in getting Trump elected.
Exactly.
And to Nathan's point, that is not only the origin of, I shouldn't say the origin, it's the path in to this kind of situation, but it is the inevitable cause of the inevitability of this situation. So over the last few decades, because Musk has been around for a while, his businesses have received approximately $38 billion in government contracts, loans, subsidies, and tax credits, often at critical moments throughout their history, and nearly 2/3 of that amount of money they have received over the past 5 years. So it's clear that Musk, as an individual, has benefited greatly from investments by our government, which is not that's not a bad thing, especially especially in the form of contracts or subsidies for social goods and stuff. These are things that make a lot of sense for our government to invest in. If NASA requires outsourcing, rocket launches to SpaceX, and there are contracts to do that, or, then okay, great. As long as there was a process for evaluating potential contractors that was fair and unbiased and accounted appropriately for their ability to deliver the quality goods that taxpayers deserve, all the more power to them. Subsidies and tax credits for things like electric vehicles that are high quality and benefit people and help benefit all of us by moving us towards a more green transportation system. These are reasonable things for the government to do. And so just the fact that Musk has built his businesses, there's been a lot of reporting around how much his businesses have benefited from government investment. Just that fact alone is not necessarily a problem. It's when you combine it with all of the other factors that are present here, when it becomes not only hypocritical, but rife with corruption.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's socialism for me, but not for thee, basically. Or, government aid. And another thing that we need to acknowledge beyond just government contracts is we need to look at some of the specific agencies that he has been gutting.
Yes.
And why gutting those specific agencies represents a clear conflict of interest. Because remember that meeting in the Oval Office where he basically said, oh, well, if I have any conflicts of interest, I guess I will recuse myself. It's okay, well, bro, I found some conflicts of interest.
Yeah.
All right. So first off, according to a fact sheet that was put together by the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Jamie Raskin, the Department of Labor, which oversees the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, which is one of the departments that has been severely cut and gutted under Doge, it had over, alongside the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, they had over a dozen open investigations into Tesla and SpaceX that were alleging unfair labor practices, safety violations, and discriminatory work practices. Another agency that he has been gutting, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Consumers have submitted over 300 complaints to to the CFPB regarding specifically Tesla. And 66 of these complaints were submitted in just the last year alone. USAID. The Inspector General, which, by the way, was fired by Trump, but prior to being fired by Trump, had actually launched a probe into Starlink satellite terminals that were provided to the government of Ukraine. So they were also investigating Musk. The Department of Transportation, which oversees national highways, had several open investigations into Tesla. The FAA had recently ordered SpaceX to carry out a formal investigation into the loss of a Starship vehicle during a test flight, and had previously ordered over $630,000 in civil penalties against SpaceX. I'm not done.
Yeah.
The U.S. Department of Agriculture had a probe into Elon Musk's Neuralink. The Environmental Protection Agency had multiple lawsuits against Tesla. The Federal Election Commission had a number of complaints filed during the election cycle that were pertaining to Elon Musk's America PAC. The Department of the Interior, which oversees fish and wildlife services, had repeatedly clashed with Elon Musk regarding some of his SpaceX launch sites in Texas. The Department of Defense. SpaceX had repeatedly failed to comply with federal reporting protocols aimed specifically at protecting state secrets. The Department of Justice. The Department of Justice had filed a 2023 lawsuit against SpaceX alleging discrimination against hiring asylum seekers and refugees. The Security and Exchange Commission sued X in January of 2025, alleging that Musk had misled shareholders about his Twitter stocks in 2020. And finally, the Department of Government Ethics, days after members of Congress had requested that they investigate Elon Musk's conflicts of interest, the director of the Office of Government Ethics was fired by Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So there are multiple conflicts of interest in here, and most of these agencies are ones that have either been severely gutted or basically taken control of. And when you put it all together, the bullshit about, well, if I have a conflict of interest, I'll recuse myself, it really rings hollow at this point.
Especially because Trump has laid the groundwork for this corruption by firing the director of the Office of Government Ethics, as well as at least 17 inspectors general, whose literal jobs it is to go and find conflicts of interest and assess them. And so it totally rings hollow, Nathan. You're totally right to say, like, well, if there are conflicts of interest, we'll find them and we'll protect them. When you fired the people whose jobs it is to find and protect us from conflicts of interest.
And don't forget that one inspector general that was fired after basically putting out a report saying, hey, millions of dollars worth of food that is supposed to be used by USAID is at risk of basically rotting in the next few weeks if we don't do something about it. And the Trump administration was like, okay, great, you're fired.
Yeah, exactly. I want to dive a little deeper into one of these examples because I think the removal of watchdogs, and the bullying of agencies, regulatory agencies that are designed to protect us, is one of the angles of Musk's corruption that I think we should dig into. There are also others. We should talk about his self-dealing, which is pretty clearly in place here. So like getting contracts for his companies from the government, as well as just literally holding an auto show on the fucking White House lawn.
That can't be legal. That can't be legal.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the FAA and SpaceX. So I think you mentioned this one, Nathan. So the SpaceX had a Starship which is kind of cool. We have starships. I will say Elon Musk is good at branding shit, which exploded in January, which, raining debris down on the Caribbean. And as a result, the FAA temporarily grounded the rocket program of SpaceX while they're ordering this investigation. And as Nathan mentioned, levied a series of fines. The agency's chief counsel at the time said, quote, "Safety drives everything we do at the FAA." And the fines were specifically for, quote, "failure of a company to comply with the safety requirements will result in consequences," which were these fines. So they have basically repeatedly defied safety protocols that are required to avoid fines and allow your flights into the air. As in response to this, Musk had called for the chief of the FAA, Mike Whitaker, to resign. The day after Trump's inauguration, he did. A full 4 years before the end of his term. And so now Musk and his team have significant influence over the FAA, including firing a bunch of people, and is in a position to directly influence the kind of safety regulation that gets enforced against SpaceX. So specifically, the Office of Commercial Space Transportation is a small office that's responsible for all of the licensing and safety protocols, which is mainly public safety, right? This is not like we're protecting, the investment in rockets. This is making sure that debris doesn't rain down on our homes and our cars and our kids, right? And so this one agency is like responsible for the public safety and licensing commercial rocket launches, and they have been significantly understaffed. So even Musk doesn't have to fucking undo regulation. He can just gut these agencies of the people that do the enforcing. And so at the same time as like he's been going after this agency, they've seen like a 6-fold increase in launches over the past 6 years, right? From 26 in 2019 to 157 last year, with SpaceX leading the pack among launches, with only 160 people to oversee the safety of these flights, right? And so they're responsible for like evaluating the risk to public safety, the potential harms associated with a launch, as well as potential environmental damage and interference with other like air travel and space travel. And typically this process to evaluate a single launch takes 5 months because it's so complex. And so as a result, like they're just not able to keep up with the amount of launches, and therefore the effectiveness of this regulation and protecting public safety is reduced. So I think a good kind of deeper dive example into the way that Musk is able to skirt around public safety legislation by gutting these agencies that enforce those regulations.
Yeah.
There's also a bunch of examples of self-dealing with Trump and the Trump administration and Musk. So obviously we mentioned like literally having Teslas on the White House lawn talking about how big the computers were. It's quote, "It's all computer" from Trump.
And I find it amazing how on the campaign trail before Musk joined with
Yeah.
Trump was regularly talking about how terrible electric cars were.
Yeah.
Like remember when he had that weird thing about, I don't know, being in an electric car and there being sharks in the water or some shit. I don't even remember what the fuck it was about. But like he regularly chastised the idea of electric cars. Like he made fun of the fact that you do have to wait for a while for them to charge.
Mm-hmm.
And just all of a sudden, he flips on a fucking dime, which just shows you how Trump's only principles are, do you make me feel good?
Yeah.
If you make me feel good, I'll praise whatever the fuck you want.
Totally. Yeah. And to that point, the turnaround of like the Republicans in general has been so remarkable on electric vehicles. Like at one point recently, the State Department, it came out that the State Department was evaluating a award to Tesla for a $400 million government contract to produce armored electric vehicles to transport diplomats. Now, on its face, again, this is another example. Like, not the weirdest thing in the world. Like, armored electric vehicles sounds good. We like electric vehicles. The fucked up part is that it's like a default contract to Tesla. Although, Tesla's a major EV manufacturer, so like maybe not the craziest thing in the world. When this came out, though, that it hadn't gone through like the typical channels of evaluating, like subcontracting this work in order to ensure that they could produce what was necessary, right? The State Department issued a statement saying that the purchase was on pause and that it actually started under the Biden administration. Oh, no conflict of interest there, except for this. That statement by the State Department was intentionally misleading because what had started under the Biden administration was a $483,000 investigation into potentially being able to have armored electric vehicles. And so under the Trump State Department, that was bumped up to $400 million and a contract for those vehicles. Now, the State Department did say that it was now on pause, but that's also partially because the military was like, we don't want these. So another example of self-dealing and a clear conflict of interest.
Yeah. And look, on one hand, I guess it's kind of nice that Republicans are no longer trying to say that if you even touch an electric car, you're just going to turn gay.
Sure.
But like, we also need to make sure that the electric cars that we are creating are decent ones and
Sure.
have high standards. And the fact of the matter is, the fact that various different regulatory agencies that specifically are there to make sure that the products that are put out there are safe and fulfill a certain minimal level of standards, the fact that those very government agencies are the ones that he is targeting doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
Totally.
So look, this isn't me being anti-electric vehicle. I am pro-electric vehicle. I love the idea of electric vehicles. And the fact that I love the idea of electric vehicles is why this pisses me off so much.
Exactly.
Because this is stifling it. This is stifling electric vehicles. You are destroying the brand of electric vehicles. All right.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people. Just today, I was out with my wife. We were on a lunch date with our kid, and I walked by a Tesla, and it had this sign in the back that said, "I bought this before I knew he was an asshole."
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's the thing. You've destroyed the Tesla brand, and you've destroyed the brand of electric cars among the people that most want to do something to actually help the environment.
Totally. Yeah, and to your point, it's not at all about the quality of these products. It's about the fact that we need safety standards, and we need those standards to be enforced, and we need a government that's able to independently evaluate the best people to do a job, not someone who is able to, at their whim, grant themselves hundreds of million dollars in federal contracts. So along those lines, Starlink, which is a subsidiary of SpaceX and also owned by Musk, has been a driving force of a lot of this self-dealing in the government. So Musk has publicly called for federal agencies to adopt Starlink or to award Starlink grants in order to install it in the government. Now, there are places where Starlink might make a lot of sense. Like there were multiple federal agencies that were exploring the use of Starlink for internet access in places where, they couldn't get access to internet otherwise. You think like disaster zones, right? It's easy to set up. It's really fast. It's actually a really high quality product. There's a lot of reasons why they might use it. And so there were already federal agencies evaluating this thing. But Musk's pressure to get the government to use this and his forced implementation of this via Doge starts to raise some questions. Because in the example of one agency, the General Services Administration. This is an administrative agency. They have an office building in D.C. They're not going to disaster zones. They already have internet. They have had Starlink installed at the behest of the Doge team. Usually, putting in new internet would require security evaluation, evaluation of the business needs, a procurement plan, like the kinds of things that make sure we don't waste money and we don't expose our government to cyber security risks. Well, this system was installed within a couple of days of the Doge team in getting into place, which means that really none of that due diligence could have taken place. And again, this agency already fucking has internet. So it's just a fucking contract to line Musk's pockets. Similarly, there was a SpaceX engineer who is a member of the Doge team, who had instructed FAA employees at the headquarters in D.C. to, quote, immediately start work on a program to deploy thousands of the company's Starlink satellite terminals to support the National Airspace System, and then threatened those employees if anyone impeded the implementation of this work with losing their jobs. So basically, like, just put this system in place or lose your job. Similarly, the company has been attempting to replace a Verizon contract at the Federal Aviation Administration with a Starlink system instead. So it's a $2.4 billion contract that was awarded through the standard process to Verizon in order to like rebuild the infrastructure at the FAA's traffic control system. And on a whim, Musk has pressured the FAA to open that contract up to Starlink as well. And so they are literally like now evaluating the incorporation of Starlink instead of or in addition to Verizon. So literally just adding tons of potential cost to the program just so that they can use Starlink. On top of that, the Doge and Musk have been attempting to elbow their way into a Biden program, which was designed to deliver broadband internet service to underserved and rural areas. Now, this program has not had a ton of success, right? Throughout the Biden administration, it has not delivered any internet yet to anyone. It's plagued with a lot of red tape. Partially, that reason is because it needs to provide a certain amount of reliability, a certain like a low-cost option for low-income users and stuff like that. But Starlink is attempting to muscle its way in on this $43 billion program, even though it, at this point, can't meet the reliability standards and isn't proposing a low-cost option. And yet, the Commerce Department is investigating ways that it can work around the rules of the law in order to enable Starlink to get contracts to provide this broadband internet. So yet another way that his position in government is he's directly leveraging it in order to enrich himself. And normally an inspector general would be investigating this and would call it out, except Trump fired them because he was laying the groundwork for this corruption from the beginning. One last thing I wanted to call out, because I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, the theme of this is that Musk is very happily and willing to endanger all of us, compromise our benefits of the government in order to enrich himself by moving quickly and blitzing the government. I did want to call out another example of this at the National Labor Relations Board. So this is another casualty of Doge and its incredibly reckless and potentially, corrupt behavior. So the National Labor Relations Board investigates and adjudicates complaints about unfair labor practices. We've talked about them. They are one of the agencies that's been gutted by Doge. They also have in their systems a significant amount of highly sensitive and confidential and proprietary data, including information about employees that are attempting to form unions, and proprietary business information. Things that experts think could be abused, including records of private companies with cases before the agency, including potentially damaging testimony, information about private information about union leadership, as well as legal strategies and internal data on competitors. Some of those competitors are competitors of Musk and SpaceX, right? So there's a ton of super sensitive information here. And a whistleblower recently came out during a testimony before Congress and described the way that Doge came in to this, to the NLRB. So basically, Doge engineers came in. They were granted the highest level of access beyond pretty much any other single individual in the organization, right? And all of a sudden, the technical staff at the NLRB started to notice spikes in data leaving the NLRB, right? Again, this highly sensitive data that could directly benefit Elon Musk, and a lot of other people, right? The whistleblower described this data as 10 gigabytes or more, the equivalent of a full stack of encyclopedias if it was all text files. So a significant amount of data was leaving the NLRB. At the same time, the Doge team was covering their tracks. They were deleting logs from their access to systems. They were removing monitoring tools and deleting records, and basically like evasive behavior that a cybersecurity expert described to NPR as being compared to what a criminal or state-sponsored hackers might do in an environment like this. Meanwhile, as they were in there extracting this data, the tech folks at the NLRB started noticing suspicious login attempts from IP addresses in Russia, similar to like a cybersecurity attack, right? And so, including one Russian IP address that appeared to have a correct username and password that was created mere minutes before by the Doge engineers. So this is like a potential extreme cybersecurity vulnerability and attack that was, as far as we know, halted, but we don't know where this data went, with incredibly sensitive data about about U.S. citizens, our unions, and our companies. And so at the very least, this is incredibly reckless. At the worst, it's like espionage. So I think, all of this ties together like a combination of Musk's, a combination that exemplifies the Trump administration: recklessness, self-dealing, the destruction of regulatory agencies that protect all of us just because it makes their lives a little bit easier, and just the total willingness to sell out the American people to line their own pockets. So now it's time for a more lighthearted segment, a Here's Why That's Bullshit. So Nathan, what's a Here's Why That's Bullshit?
Well, Michael, Here's Why That's Bullshit is a segment that we like to do because every now and then there's some type of mainstream talking point that just is out there. Is out there that people are just saying, that even some people on the left might be hearing and thinking, okay, well, I guess that makes sense or whatnot. But every now and then, one of those mainstream talking points is just verifiably false. And in fact, actually has a very easy counter argument to that. If you are equipped with that counter argument, the next time you hear that talking point, you can very simply say, so here's why that's bullshit.
That is why we love this segment. It enables you to talk to the people in your life that are pushing or repeating talking points and just have the facts to disillusion them. So Nathan, what is our Here's Why That's Bullshit this week?
Well, Michael, our Here's Why That's Bullshit this week is the talking point that is going around about the 200 plus people that were kidnapped off the street and then human trafficked to a concentration camp in El Salvador, because that's what it fucking is. And the talking point is actually one that we saw originally from the White House press secretary, who, when asked, how many of these people are actually criminals, she responded by saying, all of them, because they're all illegals, therefore they're all criminals because they all committed a crime. And you also often hear even leftists will actually be kind of accepting this framing. They might say something like, well, their only crime was crossing the border illegally or whatnot. So here's why that's bullshit. So first off, it's important to understand that being a criminal is not official until you have been convicted of a crime.
Convicted, people.
Exactly. So, by definition, if you are taken without due process, you are not a criminal. So these people who were taken off the streets without due process, shipped off to a concentration camp without due process, you cannot call them criminals for that because there was no due process. They're not felons. They're not criminals because they were not given due process. And the reason why that's important is we don't even know how many of them were actually people that entered originally illegally. We don't know that because there's no mechanism for that. All right? Basically what this means is that ICE can say anybody is an illegal immigrant. It doesn't matter if they're a citizen, if they're a permanent legal resident, they can say anybody is an illegal immigrant. And if they're not, and they try to say, actually, I'm not, they might say, okay, prove it. It's like, well, okay, I'll prove it in court. Well, you're not getting a day in court because we're not doing due process.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's just no such thing as being a criminal without due process.
And that's why that's bullshit.
For our next segment, we are talking about a plague on our time, a true epidemic, something that brings heartache to my life every day. Robert F. Kennedy. So last week, RFK, our esteemed Secretary of Health and Human Services, responsible for running a huge organization that not only protects us from pathogens and illnesses, but also is responsible for helping to find and fund the most important research into health that may not benefit us today or tomorrow, but will save lives and improve lives for decades to come. Decided that his biggest priority was to do a press conference about the scourge of autism.
Man, do I have a lot of shit to say about this. Okay, so I've spent a lot of time looking at the specific transcript. There has been a lot of things that he's said that have been put out there. There's one specific thing that he said, one specific quotation that he made, a statement that he made. That this one hasn't made the rounds as much, but this one finally convinced me on an issue that I've actually been struggling with back and forth. I've been going back and forth between trying to figure out is RFK just really, really fucking stupid, or is he lying on purpose? Like, is he lying about autism? Is he lying about vaccines on purpose? Does he know that he's lying? And there's actually, and we'll get to this later, but there's a specific statement that he made that undeniably just verifies completely 100% he knows exactly what he's fucking doing. He knows exactly what he is doing. He is lying on purpose. He is purposely trying to mislead you. But we will get to that. First off, let's discuss kind of the central arguments that he was making and discuss why they are bullshit. So, first off, one of the things that he brings up is the fact that since 1990, rates of autism have increased by 480%. Right? 22 years ago, the prevalence of autism among children was 1 in 150. I remember when I was in high school, the number was 1 in 70. And I remember that number specifically because I actually did a speech about autism, and I cited a specific source showing the numbers from the time. And the prevalence just 2 years ago was 1 in 36. All right, 1 in 36. So in 22 years, rates of autism among children has gone from 1 in 150 to 1 in 36, which is a staggering increase.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It's such an increase that RFK has gone so far as to refer to it as an epidemic. And he uses the term for people that deny that it's an epidemic. He uses the term epidemic denial. I know, real original. And he is taught, and in this speech, he basically talked about how it is the mainstream media industry standard to be complicit with this epidemic denial, specifically because they don't want us to look into the environmental exposures that has been causing this vast increase, right? Now, remember I said that 2 years ago, the number was 1 in 36? Well, the reason why he was compelled to do this speech at this specific time is because there was a more recent number that put that specifically at 1 in 31, which means that it has increased even more in just the last 2 years. And one of the arguments that he points out to basically say, like, if you accept the epidemic deniers narrative, then you would basically have to say that researchers, he cites a specific example of a research study in North Dakota in 1987, that they found that autism rates were about 3.3 per 10,000, which was around in line with another study which had that number in 1 in 10,000 in Wisconsin 17 years before that. So that's 17 years before 1987. And again, remember, the most consistent numbers nowadays were 1 in 36, which is 83 times higher. What his argument then is that if you accept that there is not an epidemic happening, you basically would have to say that in North Dakota, they missed 98.8% of children with autism. You know, because in order for the epidemic deniers narrative to be correct, you would have to say that there is the same number of people on the autism spectrum today as existed back in 1987. All right. In order to accept that specific narrative, you would have to say that those were the same numbers, and that therefore those researchers missed 98.8% of the cases of autism. So here's why that's bullshit. So first off, and what I think is fucking amazing in this is the very easy response, the very easy counter argument to this is to point out the fact that what constitutes autism, what is diagnosable as autism, has broadened since 1987.
Exactly. It's like, well, his whole argument rests on the unintuitiveness that they would have missed 98.8% of people with autism. Except when you move the goalpost so that to expand the definition of what autism spectrum disorder is, then it becomes perfectly plausible that they might have missed 98.8% of the people with autism as it's defined today.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, he even addressed that counter argument. He said, quote, "One of the things I think we need to move away from today is this ideology, wow, that the autism diagnosis, that autism prevalence increases, the relentless increases are simply artifacts of better diagnosis, better recognition, or changing diagnostic criteria. He even addressed those arguments and just said, oh, we need to move away from that. Okay, why do we need to move away from that? Well, so here's the amazing line that he gives. The amazing line that he gives. Oh my God, this is the line right here that shows you that he knows he's fucking lying.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is one important number that completely disproves his entire fucking point. And I'll go a little bit more in depth into this number, and I'll go a little bit more in depth into more specific numbers that really disprove his point. But this specific number has a major role in disproving his entire point. At one point, he said, quote, "And most cases now are severe." All right? So you would probably define severe autism. No, I sometimes don't like that framing of like severe, high functioning, whatnot. But like, you know, the way that a lot of people would probably classify severe autism is potentially someone who's being nonverbal, someone who maybe can't use the bathroom by themselves, or other potential actions such as major head banging, major light sensitivities, doing stemming, toe locking, things like that. All right, you would probably define that as severe autism, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So what does the word most imply? What does the word most imply?
In this context, it would be a less precise version of the majority.
Yeah, exactly. Most implies a majority. Right after he says, and most cases now are severe, he said, quote, "So about 25% of kids who are diagnosed with autism are nonverbal, non-toilet trained, and other stereotypical features, headbanging, tactile and light sensitivities, stemming, toe locking, etc." 25%. 25% is not most.
Yeah.
25% is not most. 25% is not a majority. He fucking knows what the number is. That right there shows you why he is lying. But I'm not done, all right? Let's actually look at the specific numbers that show why this is fucking bullshit. Because the big thing that sparked this is that increase, is that recent study that basically showed that it's close to 1 in 30 now. All right, that major increase that showed that autism is that the prevalence of autism is 1 in 30 now. According to a study that was published in Public Health Reports, that was looking at autism rates, specifically among 8-year-olds between the years of 2002 and 2016, we can actually see the increase in the prevalence of both profound autism, which this study defines as basically having a form of autism that may include an intellectual disability or may basically preclude you from a certain level of independence. Basically, if you have autism that will make it so you won't be able to live independently, all right? So it separates out profound autism, defining it as that, and non-profound autism. And what it found was that there actually was a little bit of an increase in terms of profound autism, in rates of profound autism between 2022 and 2016. That increase was 2.7 per 1,000 children, up to 4.6 per 1,000 children. So about a 2 per 1,000 children increase. Now, that is not a major spike, but when you look at the rates of non-profound autism, in 2022, the rate was 3.9 per 1,000 children, versus in 2016, it was 14.3. It went up by over 10 per 1,000 children. By over 10 per 1,000 children. That is where the increase comes from.
Yeah.
That is Like, it is measurable. It is easy to see. This completely disproves this entire fucking speech, the entire fucking premise of this speech, the entire fucking premise of the idea of calling this an epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
It is not the fact that it is actually, that the number of people who are autistic is actually increasing. It is the fact that there is better diagnostic criteria, and they've expanded the diagnostic criteria.
Yes.
All right? In 1987, I wouldn't have been diagnosed. All right? I wouldn't have been diagnosed with autism. Do you know why I know that? Because my dad is autistic, and he lived in 1997, and you know what he wasn't? Diagnosed with autism. Do you know what he has? Autism. And he wasn't diagnosed until his 40s because the criteria for diagnostic didn't include include his form of autism until way later.
Yes.
This is measurable. This is verifiable. What he is saying is verifiably false. And the fact that he knows that it is only about a quarter of people on the autism spectrum who are nonverbal, the fact that he knows that, shows you that he is lying. Shows you that he has known all along that everything that he says about autism is complete and utter bullshit, and he knows it. He is a liar. He is a charlatan. He is a piece of shit who is demonizing the entire autistic community for I don't even know for what. All right, to gain attention, to gain notoriety. I don't even know why you're feeling the need to demonize my entire community on your bullshit crusade. And in the meantime, the result is there are people that are listening to you. There are parents who are listening to you and not vaccinating their children for preventable diseases like measles, like mumps, like rubella, like polio. They're not vaccinating their children. And as a result, children are dying. Children are dying because you have pointed at people like me and basically said, that motherfucker over there, that autistic person over there, that is scarier than dying of measles. All right? Being like that person is scarier than dying of measles. All right? The entire premise of the anti-vax movement started from a study that was carried out in the 90s by a man who has since lost his license, is not even considered a doctor anymore. He lost his accreditation completely. The study was retracted because of major conflicts of interest. The sample size was only like a little over 10 people. I think it was about 12 people. He had major conflicts of interest in that he said, like, his final conclusion was, oh, don't use the multi-dose vaccine. All right, the mumps, measles, and rubella. It wasn't even about all vaccines. It was just about the MMR vaccine, the mumps, measles, and rubella vaccine. He said, don't use that. Use the single doses, a single dose of mumps, a single dose of measles, and a single dose of rubella. But guess who owned the fucking patents on that? Andrew Wakefield, the guy that did the study. All right, he owned the patents on that. And the people that funded his study, oh, guess what? They were lawyers who were representing families that were suing the British government, alleging that vaccines had caused autism, had hurt their children. All right, he had a vested interest in the results, saying exactly what they needed to say. And as if that's not bad enough, in that study, the one that this entire fucking movement was sparked from, there were several parents that actually came forward years later and basically said they misrepresented what I said. All right, I never said this. They misrepresented what I said. This is disinformation. All right.
So not only is he just demonizing a community and using them to scaremonger about this shit, he's also to Nathan's point, knows better and has access to the best information and studies about this thing and is just refusing to incorporate it. While he is not funding fucking cancer research, he wants to stand up funding into autism when the studies have already largely been done on the things he's talking about. To Nathan's point, like the debunking of vaccines causing autism is thoroughly studied and thoroughly validated and has clearly been ruled out. We know that, the causes of autism are complex, but we know like why, if we see background increases, like that could be the case. Like, first of all, researchers have found that 60 to 90% is heritable, which makes sense, right? Like, it's just who we are. It's who our parents are. It's who our grandparents are. Like, it's like having red hair or green eyes in a lot of ways. Like, it's just us. In 40% of cases, doctors are able to find actually a specific genetic mutation. He said in his speech, like, genetics can't explain it. And like in 40% of cases, doctors have identified a specific genetic mutation, right? And other than that, we've got larger social trends. Like parents are more likely to have a child on the autism spectrum if they're older, right? Which our society and the world at large, and especially in developed countries, is moving more and more toward like increasing the age of average age of childbirth, right? Similar if a child is more likely to be on the autism spectrum if they're born prematurely. And we are better and better at neonatal care and saving the lives of children that are born early. Like, but so like there are all kinds of reasons that have been studied, explanations that even if these trends were true could help explain them. But it's just so clear that rather than actually seeking to understand what's going on, rather than understanding this community of people or this group of people, he's just using them as a scapegoat. And he's manipulating the data, and he's manipulating our stereotypes about them to do it.
Yeah. He said in the speech, quote, "These are kids who will never pay taxes. They'll never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And we have to recognize we are doing this to our children, and we need to put an end to it." He referred to autism as preventable. Here's the thing you need to understand. If autism is genetic, the only way that you prevent it is through eugenics. Now, I understand that he doesn't think it's genetic, but it is. He's just fucking wrong about that. It is. All right? And here's the thing. Here I am, an autistic who pays taxes, who has a job, who has played baseball, not well, but I've played it, who has written poems, who has been on dates, and I do use the toilet unassisted.
Yeah. I mean, I gotta say, writing poems, I just read Nathan's first fucking book, RFK. You had to have a fucking ghostwriter write your shit. And
yeah.
And I happen to know Nathan was a total slut in high school. So so
I
screw
don't know
you,
if I accept
RFK.
that classification. Well, but here's the other thing. Even if we are talking about people who are nonverbal, like one of the things I take issue with is the whole never write a poem.
Yeah.
Like there are, first off, I mentioned that I don't know if I like the classification of severe or classification of profound, because I think that oftentimes I'm not to say that there aren't some instances, several instances in which people really do need extra assistance, like say through, because of certain intellectual disabilities or whatnot. But the fact of the matter is, even for the people on the spectrum that we would consider to be more severe, or for people that are nonverbal, it's not like they're not people.
Yeah.
It's not like there's nobody inside there.
Totally.
I have met and interacted with nonverbal autistics that were fucking brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't communicate using verbal speech, but they could communicate in other ways. I once met a nonverbal autistic who made claymation videos and was able to communicate using that, and they were brilliant. They were brilliantly edited. They were brilliantly created. I mean, it's you want to say that autistics can't, write poems, or I guess by extension be artists. They absolutely can. Even the people, even those 25% that you are talking about, they can do that. They can do that. Now, sometimes we might need extra assistance, And one thing that we do need to talk about, RFK, and if you actually want to help the autism community, which it's clear that you don't, but if you actually did, we should talk about, you said they'll never have a job. We should talk about employment rates among autistics. Only about a quarter of autistics have a job. And yet, a majority of autistics can actually live independently, are actually able to live independently. So the reason why there's such a low employment rate among autistics is because workforces are too often not built for us, are not built to accommodate people on the autism spectrum. So maybe, RFK, instead of focusing so much on how broken we are, maybe you could fix the society around us that doesn't let us in to begin with. All right? Maybe you can work on that. If you do that, you could actually do some good. All right? If you do that, maybe you could actually make a difference, because that is what we need help with. We don't need you to go around telling us that our brains are broken, that we are broken. We need you to fix the society that makes it impossible for us to navigate.
Yeah. The last thing I want to say that I found so heartless was his claim that autism destroys families.
Yeah. Yeah.
Find me fucking one.
Yeah.
Find me one family whose parents aren't full of love and compassion and joy at the life that they have with their autistic child, right?
Yeah.
Or a child of an autistic person who doesn't love their parents.
Yeah.
Find me fucking one.
Yeah. All across the spectrum, and I have met, I do talks. I've done talks. I have done events in which I have talked to parents of autistics from all ends of the spectrum. And the consistent thing that I hear is just profound love. Now, yes, autism does sometimes create more struggles. You want to help with those struggles, RFK? Don't focus on the fucking prevention bullshit. Again, focus on actually fixing society. All right? Fix society so there actually are services in place. Here's an example. Special education. Your boss, RFK, your boss is trying to get rid of the Department of Education, which helps to fund IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. It doesn't fund it enough, and it never has. But now, Donald Trump wants to take away the entire Department of Education, which basically means that states would be left to fend for themselves. And one thing that I can tell you as someone who has actually served on an advisory board for a state-level Department of Education, the first thing that gets cut when there are budgetary cuts in schools is special education. That is a consistent fact. Instead of getting rid of the Department of Education, we actually need to have a system in which, for the first time ever, the Department of Education completely funds the promises that it had under the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. For once. Maybe advocate for that. Call up your boss and advocate for that if you actually want to help people on the autism spectrum. All right? And, you keep claiming, oh, well, there are environmental factors, there are environmental chemicals. Motherfucker, the Trump administration is trying to pull back regulations on chemical plants right now. If you really think that's the cause, again, call up Donald Trump and say, hey, maybe don't deregulate chemical plants. At the end of the day, this was disappointing, but it wasn't surprising.
Yeah.
All right? And it's sad because the autistic community has been fighting so hard for social acceptance and has become more and more visible over the last few years. All right? More and more people are more open with being autistic. And that has been so nice to see. And the fact that this is coming out right now at a time where we have been pushing and pushing and pushing to be visible, to push for acceptance. And the fact that he said this during fucking April, which is Autism Acceptance Month. I prefer to say acceptance than awareness because we don't just need awareness, we need acceptance. The fact that he said this during Autism Acceptance Month is just a gut punch for all of the things that we have been fighting for. So you know what, RFK, I find it amazing to say this, but your father and your uncle literally almost destroyed the entire world during a pissing contest, and somehow you're still the most disappointing Kennedy. So you know what? Go fucking lick a doorknob at a measles clinic. And stay the fuck away from autistics.
And now it's time for one of our favorite segments,
Ass Hat of the Week.
So Nathan, who is our ass hat this week?
Well, Michael, this is a surprise for you because we actually changed it before the show. But I think that we need to have a conversation about this. We absolutely need to have a conversation about this thing that happened recently. And we need to point at this individual and chastise them and also somewhat laugh for how stupid they are and horrible they are and how horrible they've become. It is late night comedian Bill Maher.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Billy Maher, come on down.
I am so happy we're doing this. Bill Maher sucks so bad. And like, oh my God, I don't even know what specific story we're talking about, but one of the things, it just drives me nuts. He's like 80% of the way to not awful, but the combination of his views and his personality just destroy that 80% with the 20% that fucking sucks.
Honestly, I don't even know. I think that that's too generous. Like at this point, because you know, if you went through it issue by issue, maybe like 80% of stuff he's on the right side of. But all he talks about is that 20% that he's so
That's
fucking
what I mean.
wrong about.
Exactly. He can't fucking get out of his own way. For sure.
The thing that's so disappointing is that when I was younger, I loved Bill Maher. All right. Because like he was one of the first people that told this guy who lived in rural Virginia, hey, there's nothing wrong with being secular.
Yeah.
All right. It's okay to be secular. You know? Also, it's okay to demand better from the Democratic Party. It's okay to want the Democratic Party to not suck, to be better. All right. And somehow he has just had this major fall from grace where every other segment, it's, you know, oh, if you don't support bombing babies, then you're pro-terrorism. Or, oh, you know, if you think trans people are people, then you have the woke mind virus or some bullshit. Like, and this latest thing, so he recently did a visit to the White House in which he actually sat down with Trump, which, by the way, he and Trump have supposedly been at odds for a long time. Like, even as he has continued to fucking suck, the one thing that he's been consistent about is basically saying, like, yeah, I'm anti-Trump, I hate Trump, Trump sucks, he's terrible. But now, he basically sat down to do this book report after his meeting with Trump, and he basically said, yeah, it went really well. He was really polite the entire time. And the person that I met is not the person that I'm constantly seeing on TV. And it's nice to know that there is actually a reasonable person in there that exists. And like during this whole segment, he even acknowledged that like, okay, this probably doesn't matter in the long run because, you know, it you know, how he is interacting with one comedian one night is different than how he than his actual policies. But he was like, but it's nice to know that that person is in there, like that there's an actual person who has reasonable thoughts, that has reasonable ideas. And here's the thing that blows my mind about this, that honestly borders on making this guy a Dershowitz bag. Do you remember the movie The Interview?
Yeah.
Bill Maher was fucking in that movie. Bill Maher was in that movie. And there's a scene in that movie where James Franco's character is interviewing Kim Jong-un, and he starts like lobbing praise at him because, you know, and if you remember, if you've seen that movie, in the first part of that movie, Kim Jong-un keeps charming him with all of the stuff. He's like, oh, this guy is my friend. This guy is my friend. He's so nice to me interpersonally. And then he, you know, eventually realizes like, no, but there's a moment during that interview in that scene where it flashes to Bill Maher watching the interview, his arms are crossed and he says, this is bullshit.
Oh my God. Didn't learn his own lesson.
And just the fact that he doesn't realize what fucking happened is amazing.
Yeah.
Dude.
And the fact that you would be face to face with Trump, you're like a public person, right? You have a platform, you have a persona, you have at least theoretically some, courage getting out there and talking to people publicly. And the fact that you would be face to face with Trump and not have the courage to like have a conflict of any kind, to just the fact that he even let the conversation go well, I think is so disappointing. The fact, because if it went well, it means you didn't do anything to rock the boat, despite all the shit that this guy's pulling.
Yeah. Now, he did say there were some moments in which he expressed like disagreement over certain things with Trump. And he said, like, Trump, didn't get all pissy. He was reasonable and he listens to me. It's like, okay, keep pushing that though, because here's one of the things he said afterwards, that this is the thing that really gets me, and this is the thing that really shows you that Bill Maher views politics as a game. He doesn't view it as like policies that actually affect people's lives. He views this as a fucking game. He said, quote, maybe seeing that if we met in person, we don't hate each other as much, and we don't, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to pretend that's a bad thing, even though he's done terrible things. No, that is a bad thing. That is a bad thing, all right? This is not your run-of-the-mill, dude that you have a few disagreements with. This is a guy that is disappearing people for thought crimes. He is having ICE basically function as his Gestapo to round up people without due process and kidnap them and human traffic them to a torture camp in El Salvador, who is now talking about sending American citizens there, again, without due process. This is a guy who has cut off services globally, which some estimates have actually gone so far as to predict that the cuts to USAID could result in deaths in the millions. This is a guy who has been aiding and abetting a genocide in Gaza, which I know Bill Maher agrees with, but that makes this worse, not better. Like this is a guy who has let the government be gutted, all to help his rich friends. This is not just some person who's done a few bad things here and there. This is a criminal. This is a criminal. This is a fascist. All right. You don't give quarter to fascists. Like this isn't me saying, oh, well, we can't have conversations anymore. We can't have conversations anymore. All right. We can have conversations with people that aren't fucking fascists. This is a fascist. So no, we can't have conversations with Donald Trump. We have to fight Donald Trump. And if you're not willing to fight Donald Trump, then just go the fuck away. We don't want you. All right. We don't need you. You're fucking useless.
So congratulations to Bill Maher for being our
Ass Hat of the week.
And now we'll end our show as we usually do with our highlights. So Nathan, what's your highlight this week?
My highlight this week is definitely Easter, because I got to see my daughter do her first Easter egg hunt.
It was sweet.
It was simple. She's only like 1.5, so it was just she would walk up to eggs, pick them up. I would present her the basket, and she would just put it in the basket. But she figured that out. She figured out that was the game, and I didn't really hide them very well,
Sure, she's young.
Obviously not. Yeah, she's young. But it was, I don't know, it was so cute. It was so cute. It was so wonderful, and she was so excited, and I don't know. It was a good moment. It was a good moment.
That's
we put
wonderful.
Cheerios in the eggs.
Nice.
And she enjoyed them
great.
Afterwards. So, beautiful moment. What about you, Michael?
Awesome.
What's your highlight?
Well, it's going to sound silly compared to that. I had a really great weekend camping. It was beautiful here. We got out. We enjoyed the outdoors, the weather. And yeah, it was really relaxing and fun. And now we will thank all the amazing people that make this show possible. So thank you to our patrons, Jerry DeViller, Taylor Bloom, Fade Out Scoop, Kyle Chaska, and Tobias Janssen. And thank you to our amazing editor, Kayla, for all they do to make this show possible. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to The Perspectrum. And you'll hear from us again next week.